the chat at some point will be the email to email Carmelia if that's documentation of your participation is important. So at this point, I'll turn this over to John and Christy.
All right, thank you very much. It's good to be with you all today, and I think it's perfectly fine that, Kathy, you don't have your script ready. I think we're all kind of finding our way for the last year and a half, and that's going to be part of our presentation today. So let me bring up my slides. And are you guys able to see those yet? Are we still? Let's see. Do I need to grab the screen? Share my screen. All right, how about that? Is that better?
Yes, we can see your screen now.
All right, there we go. All right. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I am delighted that Christy's able to help me. She's the kind of the clinical content expert here that's going to help us kind of sort through some of the feelings and issues that we've been all facing over the course of the last year. Originally, this presentation was designed for, I think, the 2020 conference that was kind of hijacked by the pandemic. This was the content we actually put together in 2019, obviously not expecting this disruption in our lives. So we were thinking about probably more focused on the issues around grief and loss with the work that you all do in the community related to the kind of engagement that you have with frail elderly, maybe in community dwelling situations and that kind of thing. But we've really been impacted strongly by the issues of loss in general and the constant and companion that we've had with loss and the limitations that we've had on our lives and the isolation that we've all felt. So we're going to focus a little bit more on that today, probably more so than the experience of death and working with people in traditional grief recovery. But you know, as we'll get into this, we're going to see that there's a lot of those issues that are the same. So I just wanted to cover a couple of things with you. This, I think, is something that both Christy and I are sensitive to, is that we both come from independent, not-for-profit organizations. Both the Kansas City Hospice and Palliative Care Organization and CPB are community-based 501c3s. So we exist on charitable donations and service delivery to our constituents and stakeholders. And we do charge fees for our services in some situations, and most of the time we're asked to provide charitable services to the community, and we willingly do that and benefit from the great support that we receive from this region. Neither of us have any conflicts of interest. We do not benefit individually from this presentation, nor basically any work that we do. All of our resources and services are inured to the benefit of our organization. And so just wanted to make sure that that was clear to everybody. Originally, we had as 4 objectives that we would be participating with you guys on learning how to incorporate grief and loss into our awareness within our programming. We'll talk a little bit about that today. We also are going to be able to share with you a little bit about the factors associated with isolation and how that impacts grief and grief recovery, the mortality of older adults, especially those in community dwelling and independent living in the community, and the issues of morbidity and mortality on their lives, which obviously has been significant over the course of the last 15 months or so. And even without COVID, but for many of them, even in the experiences of their hospitalizations related to other illnesses outside of COVID. Also, yes.
John, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you make your slides full screen?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Nope. Let's see. What do I do to? I have to get to a different view. Oh, let me see how to do that.
I believe it might be the icon next to the one that you originally had, to the right
Oops.
of it.
That one?
Yeah, try that one. Oh, no.
Yep.
Go up to your display settings. That's above.
Above. I'm sorry. Not very savvy here.
No, that's okay. It's straight above your display. It says display settings and there's a down arrow.
Next to end slideshow.
I have my, let me see if I can move this. There we go. I'm sorry, my bar wasn't just covering all that up. How about that? Is that better?
That looks better.
All right. Okay. I'm sorry. All right. So I think I was about ready to go with our third objective, that we will be able to describe at least 2 elements of normal grieving and issues associated with the complicated grief, which I'll rely heavily on Christy to help us do. And then hopefully we'll also be able to talk about 2 tools or resources that you can use in their social support networks to offer and assist older adults in dealing with coping skills and grief recovery. All right, so let's get started. I think for both Christy and me and the work that we've done over the years, and I've been at this probably about 35 years, and I know Christy's been at it a good long time as well. But what I think one of the things that I've always taken away from my work with hospice and palliative care over my lifespan since the mid 80s is that loss is loss, and it's normal, and it takes many different forms, and it impacts older adults more frequently, and certainly more profoundly than it does younger adults, but because of the frequency in which it occurs. The other thing that I think has always been very important to me in understanding how to kind of deal with folks who are struggling with grief and loss is that it's individual, and that the stages are helpful in dealing with constructs, but we have to remember that they're only constructs. So many of us probably grew up in the days of Kubler-Ross, and there were these very kind of formal steps of grief recovery and dealing with grief and loss in terms of acceptance and anger and all those kind of things. And those are helpful conceptually, but we all have to understand that we need to take people where they are, and that it's hard for us to do the work that's necessary for us in this process. And I think Christy's going to talk a little bit about some of the tasks and how they are important to do. They aren't easy, but they're important to do, and we need to make sure that we're assisting people in a supportive way for allowing them to do the work that's necessary for them to recover. And then the third thing is that it's been very important for me to understand that it takes as long as it takes. And there's a lot of harmful things that maybe you've heard yourselves in terms of your own losses, that you've heard from people that are well-intended in terms of things like, well, it's time for you to be able to get back in the world, or you need to, buck up and get ready for Christmas and that kind of stuff. And those are obviously not very helpful on occasions. And Christy's going to talk a little bit about that as well. So it's important, I think, for all of us to understand. And it taking as long as it takes also raises some concerns clinically that I hope she'll be able to talk a little bit about if it's taking an inordinate amount of time for someone to look at their loved one who's died in a human way, rather than in kind of this enshrinement and the ability for us to kind of make them saints, if you will, when they first die, is important as well. But I think a lot of this will get kind of woven back together, not necessarily in physical death, but also in the losses that we've experienced over the course of the last year. So I want to start with some hopeful messages here. So older adults, as I mentioned earlier, are far more at risk for loss and also for isolation. And particularly community dwelling older persons who don't have large family members, or maybe in neighborhoods that aren't particularly well connected, and they kind of see themselves as being isolated and alone, and may choose in some cases to actually be that way. But especially during this time where there was a lot of a fear of contagion, and we needed to make sure that they were safe and that they weren't being exposed. So we really had a lot of issues related to kind of that isolation factor kind of multiplying upon the issues that we faced related to the outbreak of COVID, and it being nothing like this has happened to us in the last century, more than the last century. So this is a particularly scary time. Now, that's somewhat been mitigated recently by the vaccination prioritization that older adults have had, and that's been helpful. But we still have a lot of people, especially community dwelling people, who are facing a lot of challenges related to the fact that they might want to be able to get the vaccine, but haven't been able to simply because of where they live, or their ability to access, technology and those kind of things. The other thing, though, that we need to remember is that resiliency plays a role in coping. And we know from research that's been conducted that the trait of older adults actually finds them to be more resilient, especially as it relates to anxiety and depression and stress-related disorders and mental health disorders that are particularly evident that we're finding in younger populations. Now, I don't want to give any sense at all that older adults are not subject to anxiety and depression and stress, but we find that there's an ability for older adults to be able to be a little bit more resilient. And that comes from the fact that there are two traits that are particularly evident in older adults. One is wisdom and one is compassion. And wisdom is defined as being a complex trait comprised of a lot of different things, including pro-social behaviors, which are like empathy and compassion, which we'll talk about in a minute. Their ability to kind of self-regulate on some of their emotions. They don't get overly excited as maybe younger adults do, especially teens who are facing a lot of suicide risks associated with this illness. They're also more reflective. Their ability to kind of look back on their own lives and think about what's important to them. That may heighten anxiety in some situations because of their fact that they're not able to be with their grandchildren, with their family members, especially those who are in living situations that they did not choose. So the folks that have been in long-term care facilities or in assisted living or those kind of things have been particularly impacted by the fact that they didn't choose to be where they were. So that might increase anxiety for them. But in general, their ability for older folks to express their wisdom in ways of being able to deal with uncertainty, to kind of sit on it, not get overly excited, to reflect on kind of what their life has been like and the joys that they've had. And also we find that spirituality and religious practices and rituals are particularly sustaining for those folks, and they rely on them heavily. I remember my own mother who cared for my dad for 27 years, 24/7. And there were really, really hard days where she would deal with the fact that he was progressing in his illness and she was experiencing that loss along with him, that he was no longer able to feed himself or he was no longer able to toilet himself. And she would end up going to the backyard and she would just grab her rosary and she would go out there for 35, 40 minutes and say, I got to get some space and I've got to get some reflection time. And that's how she would deal with it. So those things are very important, and older adults are more apt to rely on those kinds of coping mechanisms and help. And then the other area is compassion, which is also measurable. And these are measurable techniques that have been used in research, that these two traits are very important. One is the nature of mediating and moderating relationships. So they don't get overly excited. They help people calm down. They're more apt to be able to understand and empathize. And when they do that, they can provide a lot of support to other people just simply by their presence, where they're there and they're not necessarily needing to talk. They're not necessarily needing to soothe through language and support. They just provide that. So I think most of us think of possibly our mothers, grandmothers, maybe our fathers who've been very nurturing in those ways. And those are important for us to think about as we deal with older adults during this time. And then also the risks associated with loneliness for those who live in long-term care is particularly important. And this has to do with that issue of kind of not living where you would want to live. And so there is a additional risk kind of posed by that issue. Okay. So how have we been impacted? Older adults been impacted particularly through this experience of the last 15 months or so. There are losses that are associated with kind of the physical experience. Maybe that's through death or near death, separation, and those symptoms and issues play out physically. And Christy will talk a little bit about that. There are losses emotionally, which we've all experienced, obviously. That extended isolation puts us at risk of depression and sadness, profound sadness, possibly even maybe some issues related to acting out or are not dealing well with reality, escaping from reality and looking to substance abuse or other kinds of avenues that are not healthy. But we all experience losses emotionally differently, and we need to understand that. And I think Christy will talk a little bit about that in terms of how we deal with anger or acceptance and those kind of things. But there's also this ability then for us during this time to look at what are the strengths that we can discover about ourselves, especially around resiliency and wisdom and compassion that I just talked about. So that those traits that we draw on and we need to identify, talk about, bring to light, especially when we talk to older adults about those traits that they have that allow them to be able to sustain themselves, are important for us to recognize, reflect on, encourage, and support in our dealings with them, and kind of identify that for them and let them see that strengthens us as well as we're dealing with them. Okay. I'm having trouble advancing my slides here. Okay. So I'm going to turn it over to Christy now and let her kind of dive into it in terms of how it is that she sees the support that we can offer folks in attacking grief. So take it away, Christy.
Thanks, John. Thanks for just all those good thoughts about, I love thinking about the wisdom and compassion of older people that kind of has been such a gift as to our society, but also kind of allowing us to think, how can we tap into that to help with coping. So, well, thanks all. And just thinking about one thing I wanted to just kind of go through is the 4 tasks of grieving. I think lots of people are familiar with the stages of grief, but the 4 tasks of grief, some research done by William Worden, gives us kind of a structure to think about differently, how we can both think about any grief that's going on within ourselves, but also as we think about programming, how can we help people move through the tasks of grief? How can we consider ways that give them the stepping stones, the tools that they need to cope with grief better? And I think also different than stages of grief, when you think about going through a stage, it's something that you don't have a lot of control over. But when you think about tasks of grieving, you think, this is something I can do. This is something I can be active in. This is something I can help others be active in. And so that's, I think, particularly empowering to talk with folks who are grieving, to say, you're doing the work, you're doing this, not that this is happening to you. We can go to the next slide.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Christy, that the structures, the Kubler-Ross kind of constructs kind of put it out of your control, or it's like it's not part of the work that I do. And I think this idea of seeing these as tasks that allow me to say I'm getting better at it, or I'm trying harder, allows you to do the work that's necessary, and it helps you kind of the locus of control shifts away from it's outside of me to it's within me. I think it's a really good point. So thank you for sharing
absolutely. And I think anytime that we can help people to feel like they are in control, because often when a loss has happened, whether it's a death or loss of job or loss of home, people feel such lack of control. So anytime we can shift and say, you do have some control here, you have control in how you respond and how you work through, I think that really helps people to feel empowered and gives them kind of courage to move forward. So the first task we talk about is accepting the reality of the loss. And this is just really facing that this has happened and working to accept. In some ways, it's avoiding avoidance, if that makes sense. This is people starting to say, okay, every time I go to pick up the phone to call, that person's not going to be there. And it's normal to just have that thought over and over of, oh, I need to accept this, or I'm ready to pick up the phone. Oh, wait, I can't do that. And so just kind of working through that this is happening. And this is something that people have to do continually, sometimes for weeks and months. And sometimes it's a process that, oh, when I plan that vacation, this person's not going. I need to kind of rethink. And so there's 1,000 little ways that accepting the reality of the loss happens in the course of daily life and of the course of a week and a year. But just encouraging people to understand, to just say, this is yes, that's really hard what you're going through. I think our role as helping professionals in this is so often just listening, understanding and empathizing with what people are going through here. Just saying, yeah, that sounds really, really hard what you're experiencing, and I'm here to just be with you in that. I just want to support you in that. And then the next task, talking about experiencing the pain of grief and sorrow, just allowing for the conscious experience of the pain, the hurt, the anger, the loneliness, allowing ourselves to feel without judgment. And so, you may have a person that comes into you and is crying and just say, I just need to stop crying. And it's the kind of thing you can say, it's okay to just cry. This is a hard and difficult process. I have a lot of people that will come in for a grief support session and they say, I promised myself I wasn't going to cry, or I said I wasn't going to cry today. And I say, that's actually not a good goal, because we want you to release. We want you to feel what you're feeling instead of bottling it up. And so as you work with people, just allowing them to cry, handing them a tissue, being able to just say, this is an okay and safe space for you to have some feelings. And what you're doing is being active in your healing when you express that emotion.
Yeah, I wonder, Christy, could you talk a little bit too about recognizing this need for us to reach out to folks when they're going through just the grief of not being able to be together? So I think this is more than just not having someone that you can plan with, but I know of a number of friends of mine have talked about their parents being in long-term care settings over the course of the last year, and these kind of uncontrolled sobbing sessions that they would have with them about, you need to come get me out of here. You need to help me get away from this place. And I just know the devastation and the feelings that the adult children had. Many of them my own age. I've got a friend of mine who's my age, whose mother's still alive in a nursing facility in North Dakota. And he said all of his siblings, including himself, have been kind of subjected to her kind of these uncontrolled situations, and they just feel helpless. So could you talk a little bit about not only what we can do for the adult, but what do we need to be doing for ourselves when we are experiencing those kind of those isolation periods?
Right, absolutely. I think the number one thing is validating the feeling of the parent, the feeling of the person that it feels stuck, is say, yes, I know how hard this is, and I'm so sorry that you're in this situation. I wish I could do something different. I'm on your team. I wish that we could fix this. And then for the person who's kind of bearing the brunt of that emotion, just to find ways to take care of ourselves. When you talk about these adult children who have their parents saying, just sobbing and please come get me. And that is such an emotional burden and emotional weight when you're not able to do something for that parent. So I think just looking at how do I take care of myself? How do I release some of the emotional weight that I'm carrying, whether that's, getting outside for a walk or calling a friend and saying, gosh, I just had the most difficult conversation with my mother and I'm just worn out, or needing to cry about that to another person.
Right.
This is overwhelming. And we've all been in just overwhelming situations this year. And I think seeking support where we can is absolutely what we need to do. And laughing when we can, to just say, gosh, this is the most insane thing that I never envisioned this. I just need to laugh about how ridiculously hard this is. I'm going to answer a question from Betty in the chat. Betty, I think, said, is it okay to cry with people? And I would say, yeah, Betty, I think that's just, we need to be aware of our own kind of keeping our own stuff. If you're talking with a person who's grieving and they're emotional, I think it's okay to just say, yeah, I feel this with you, especially if it's somebody that you knew and cared about. What we want to be careful about is that they don't have to comfort us.
Right.
We don't want to get to a point where they're offering us a tissue and just saying it's okay. but just to say, yeah, I understand because I cared about that person too. I loved that person. I think that can absolutely share the burden. But we just want to be sure that we're the comforter where we need to be rather than needing to be comforted. Is that, I guess
Yeah,
there's no way
one of
to answer the question,
that's a great way to talk about it. One of the things that we used to always do with volunteers when we were prepping them for hospice is we would remind them, and staff as well, is that when you know that you're going to cry or it's going to be a very, profoundly sad situation, it's okay to do that. But before you say anything or do anything demonstrably is first check with yourself and find out where are these tears, who are these tears for? Are they for the sadness of the situation? Are they directed at the situation and the person, or are they internal? And so kind of your point about where is that coming from? Where's that? Because it is perfectly fine to cry with people in a tremendously sad situation and struggling situation. But when we're directing that attention back on us, which is what you just talked about, that's not usually helpful in the situation. And so you may, at that point, you may want to excuse yourself and go, because it is rewarding. So I know you do a lot of work with children who experience loss. I mean, families who experience loss of children, and it's very common for young mothers and nurses and others who are in that situation where they've got small children themselves, and sometimes that sadness is about the loss of that child, but it's also about their own. So we need to be careful about, as you just suggested, that we're sharing those tears for the right reasons and in the right way.
Right. Absolutely. Those are great points. And I think sometimes, I've sometimes been with somebody and shed a tear as they tell a story. And I just think that is a tender story of your love. And I'm honored that you shared that with me. And that touches me emotionally. Sometimes just sharing in that way, I think, can be helpful too. Just reminding people that their story of love, grief is ultimately a story of love, and hearing that can touch our hearts, and sharing that we're touched in that way. Let's see. I'm going to read another one from the chat. During COVID time, were you finding people being in the counseling room more because they're grieving because they're encountering so much grief? I do think we're finding a lot more people seeking support because of the cumulative effects of grief. I think it's not just one loss. With the death, I've lost this, and we've lost the ability to get together with our family. We've lost the ability to communally experience that. I've been meeting with a lady who said, I just kind of, after my husband died, I just went to my daughter's house in another state, and then none of her neighbors knew that the death had occurred because there wasn't a funeral. And so the coming back was really tricky. She said it's just really challenging. Nobody knows that this happened because we didn't have a funeral. We didn't have a public expression of grief. And so that's a grief, and having to face that over and over again is challenging.
This might be a good place for you to talk about complicated grief, because I think that, the cumulative loss, when it piles up and it piles upon piles, then that's where some of those disorders kind of, get exacerbated, or the loneliness and the isolation and the anger kind of just pile up on top of each other, especially when you don't have that ability to hug somebody or to be intimate in a physical way that provides that comfort, which we've also faced. And so you don't have touch, you don't have proximity, you don't have that intimacy of being able to look at each other and be close to each other, or if you do, it's with a mask on or whatever. So I think that's what's so awful about this whole illness. And in many cases, some of those deaths occurred and the person didn't die of COVID, but they were denied, the families were denied the same experiences that all the rest of us, it's like, well, my mom didn't even die of COVID, and I can't get with my family. I can't mourn her loss. I can't. So can you talk a little bit about maybe how those kinds of multiple situations piling on top of each other kind of sometimes lead to complicated grief? And if they're a non-clinician dealing with these folks, can they recognize those kind of, troubling signs, and what do they do with that? Where do they go and provide some support to that person, clinically, or if they need clinical help, how would they do?
Right,
How would they-
right. Yeah, absolutely. I think just the occurrence of complicated grief right now is so much greater because of these compounding losses, because maybe it wasn't a COVID death, but it was, we weren't able to be together. We weren't able to gather with family, and we're not getting the same kind of relief that we get from grief that we have traditionally in all of human history depended on. The nearness, the family, the hugs, the food together. We're not having that. And so I think people are truly having a lot more complicated grieving experiences. And that's not to say that I think people are also coping in beautiful and wonderful ways, but it's, I think, tremendously harder right now. Thinking about, I think the number one thing we can do as professionals and as people who are coming in is just validate people's pain. And it doesn't matter how, if you've heard the same story a number of times of, I wasn't able to be with my spouse, I wasn't able to be with, or I miss my family, or, I think each time if you can just validate and say, yes, this is so hard, and not say this is hard for everybody in a way that dismisses, but also like, yes, collectively we're having a tremendously difficult time, and this wears on you particularly because of this situation, and just validate that pain. Because I think so often when people feel heard, when they feel cared for, when they feel seen, that changes the equation so much. It changes how people grieve when they think somebody really gets it, somebody cares about me, and somebody is listening and understanding. So I think that's, kind of the number one thing that we can do. Things to look for in terms of like, this person may need some additional help. Are they taking care of themselves physically? That's kind of the number one way. Are they showering? Are they getting food? Are they sleeping? And just asking, that's kind of our first line of assessment in grief is nutrition and sleep and personal care. I mean, and you can kind of evaluate somebody when they walk into your senior center, into your wherever you are, and their hair hasn't been washed in a week, and they just kind of look disheveled. You might say, how are you doing? You it looks like things have been rough for you. And sometimes people are just really grateful for that opening. But sometimes you'll have to dig a little bit and say, are you eating okay? Because it's sometimes really hard for people after they've lost somebody, or when their life feels crazy. Sometimes it's hard to make sure that you're eating at regular intervals. And if they're not showering, you can also kind of ask about, are you finding that you're crying a lot? And if, it's normal to cry, it's normal to be tearful, but if people are just kind of spending all day weeping, or just feeling like they're completely out of control, that's a good time to start looking for some professional help for them. And ways to find that would be, kind of looking at, do they have, what are their natural supports? As well as, do we need to look for a private therapist? Do we need to look for a support group? Do we need to look for, check on Psychology Today and find a counselor in their area? Those are some good ways to proceed. Does that kind of answer that, John, or any other?
Yeah. I think some of these items that are even on the screen right now, finding support where needed, and trying to find out for them is would this be helpful if we were to get a little bit more support for you in this area by helping you with maybe some tasks that your husband did for 50 years and now you're expected to do it, and your children are in three other states and they're not here. So just being able to make sure that the loneliness is not exacerbated by the fact that partner is not around to do those sorts of things.
Right, exactly. So yeah, talking about adjusting to the environment without a loved one is another task of grief. And I think this is a kind of practical one that I think there's a lot of ways to help with this. This looks like, how can we help you learn to cook? We at Kansas City Hospice, we have a workshop that we regularly do called Cooking for One. And a lot of our folks will come and they enjoy talking and enjoy getting together, but they also leave both having had a meal and sharing around the table, but also with some recipes and some ideas, because that's a really practical way to serve, and a practical way for them to just say, okay, I've got 3 recipes in hand. I can do this. Yeah, classes on home repair, or helping even people figure out where vehicle maintenance can happen. Sometimes I had a lady once, and her kind of where her hang up was in grief. She said, I just don't know how to check the air in my tires. And we talk about it kind of regularly. She said, this is just such a stress for her. I don't know how to check the air in my tires. And so we ended up calling a mechanic, and she just set up an appointment and said, can you just help me learn how to do this? And then I think what she ended up doing was make a regular appointment. But there's just certain things that people become kind of fixated on, like, I don't know how to do this. And helping people find the resources of, here's what you do. Also, when people are just finding kind of the emotional and social support can be really, really important. I mean, that's what so many of you all work in and on, is just helping people feel socially supported, but just ways that people can get together and just say, okay, I know on Tuesdays I'm going to this coffee social, or I know that there's something for me to do with other people regularly. I kind of talk with people about building some pillars into their week, so that they don't have to think about every single day, what am I going to do? It's like, okay, here's the thing that I do on Mondays. I go to the senior center for a meal, or I go to a class every Monday, or quilting circle, and just helping people find that emotional and social support, which, as we all know, has been incredibly difficult this year.
Christy, I had a question. Are for you guys at KC Hospice, when you offer grief support, are they limited only to the clients that you've served, or can someone who's maybe experienced grief join one of the support groups?
Yeah, they're open to anyone.
Okay, I think that was, so we'll have your contact information. So
yeah,
I think that might be helpful for people too, who are particularly concerned about somebody and they don't know if they need it, and say, would it be helpful if I took you to a grief support group, and I know of one, and it's just, just people who've been through what you've been through, and they just get together once a week, and maybe so they don't have to have been through KC Hospice in order for them.
Right, absolutely. And I think most hospices and churches that offer grief groups are just open to anyone. But yes, our hospice, Kansas City hospice groups are all open to the community.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
You ready for the next one?
Yes, thank you. So then the last task of grief, and I do want to say, as we talk about these tasks of grief, that they are not do one, check it off, do the next one, check it off, but they're just kind of a continuous process that you're moving through. And I think you kind of do a lot of the first thing of acknowledging the reality at the beginning, and then you feel the pain, because we've all talked about that numbness that happens at the beginning, and you kind of move into the pain of grief later. And then, so I just want to be sure that we're understanding that it's not like, oh, I'm done with this person's done with this, we're just moving on. But yeah, we talk about finding enduring connection, helping people to feel, while the person or thing that they've lost is gone from their life, it doesn't mean that that the love is gone. It doesn't mean that the memories are gone. It's just trying to help people feel that they have that connection to their loved one ongoing. I was thinking about, one way that we do this at Kansas City Hospice is we have a yearly ceremony called Circle of Lights, where people light a luminary memorial. We've done it online last year, and it'll be online again this year. But typically we meet at the fountain at the plaza, and there's luminaries, and it's a significant and beautiful ceremony. It's very short. Just those kinds of things give people a place and way to go and remember year after year, and say, oh, here's our luminary, here's this person, they're not forgotten, they're remembered. And those kinds of ways of remembering within your organizations and agencies, just thinking about how can we do that? What does that look like?
I think that's really important, especially when the person can't be with you, and those kind of traditional rituals that we relied on, memorial services and those kind of things, aren't available to us. And just if you're having a conversation over the phone, or you're doing a back and forth on an email, or however it is that we're connecting to them, is to allow them the opportunity to reflect on what this person meant to them. Tell me what kind of person they were. How would they have reacted in this situation? What do you think they would have said, given what you just shared with me? What's your voice inside of you that allows you to be, and allow them to kind of reflect on that, because those rituals that we do are, well, all of us, we probably don't think about the importance of ritual in our life as we should, but there are all kinds of ways that we do it, through the, cooking of a particular meal, to, the cadence of life in terms of what they did in the morning and in the afternoon, and kind of maybe memorializing those and participating in, not that they become obsessive, but that they help kind of bring out the best of that person and help us think about them, and be able to talk about them in a way that's fond memories, and really kind of bring meaning to life. I think those are important reflections for all of us.
Absolutely. And I think just looking for ways to help people incorporate those. And I love that, learning to listen to their voice. So many people say, I just wish I could talk to this person about this particular problem. And I just say, you had all of those years of talking about them. You can think, let's think about what they might say to you in that situation. One example of just memorializing that is a personal, my grandpa and I always went to High Boy in Independence, and it's a burger restaurant. And so Memorial Day and on his birthday, my kids and I go there, we get a burger and tots, and it's just a significant ritual for us. I talk about him, I share about him, and just kind of encouraging people. It doesn't have to be a big thing. It doesn't have to be something that's, a big ceremony, involve a lot of people. For us, it's just burger and tots, and remember my grandpa. And so encouraging people to just do those little things, going to a restaurant that was their favorite, or creating a favorite meal. Can be really simple, but creating that enduring connection, where you feel like, okay, I can keep doing this and it's significant for me.
Yeah, in tons of ways. I was just thinking myself, my next door neighbor is an older woman who'd cared for her mother for 3 years in her home just recently. And she's a very private person, than my next door neighbor. And so she really didn't share with the neighbors much, but she did tell me one time, her mother told me one time how much she enjoyed peonies. And so since she's died, this has been a couple of years ago, we have a huge peony bush, and I just take over 4 or 5 around Mother's Day and give them to her and just say, in memory of your mom. I always get this big, long thank you note from her every year about how important it is for her, because it touches a memory for her, and the fact that I remembered enough to say, okay, this is really important. My mom's not around either, but I know I can bring a kind of a special memory for my neighbor in that. So I think those are the kind of things that, back to your point about listening to that voice, is that I know for Denise, that her relationship with her mother around Memorial Weekend was always, and Mother's Day was always around peonies. And so it makes me feel better too. I feel like I'm finally contributing. So I think all those kind of things, they're not formal programs. They're not, events or anything that we have to plan. They're just thoughtful ways for us to be able to make sure that we're connecting with those people, and maybe keeping a special list of folks that we know are important for us to reach out to, because they're particularly vulnerable, or they're kind of at risk.
One thing, especially, if you're kind of thinking about, these are some people that I need to particularly keep in my radar, keep in my thoughtfulness zone, is adding it to your calendar. Just saying, okay, if you have somebody that and someone dies in their life, check in with them, not just at the beginning, but just put in your calendar 6 months later to say, oh, I'm just going to give myself a reminder to just give them a phone call, or take over some flowers, or just send a card, because I guarantee that they're still grieving, even though the rest of the world has moved forward and is just thinking, oh yes, we missed that person, but our life has moved on. We kind of say at 5 months and 11 months, because people are anticipating that anniversary, that it's been 6 months. People kind of sit with that heavy, it's coming, and same with a year. And so if you check in a little bit before that, it feels really significant to people that you remembered, and that they're not the only one carrying this heavy weight of grief. When they start to feel like maybe they're kind of it's their primary burden instead of a communal one as it goes along. So yeah, putting those in your calendar, I think, can be a really
I think 5 and 11, and I think 7 and 13 are probably also important, because I think everybody kind of reaches out at those special moments to say it's his birthday or something like that. But it's the 3 weeks later or the 4 weeks later that are oftentimes the loneliest times, where, okay, everybody remembered him on his birthday, and I understand that all the kids were here and all that kind of stuff, or the kids sent me cards and that kind of thing. But it's the next month that it's, and I think jotting that time in your calendar to send a note or call or send a wish or something like that are particularly important, to say you're remembered every day, and the person is remembered every day by lots of people. I think that's an important way for us to make those connections.
Right. Absolutely.
I know we're gonna try to ask the group to maybe come up with some ideas. So I'm trying to keep track of time here. So why don't we?
Let's do that now. I was just kind of hearing about
okay.
What are some things what ideas do you have? What things are you already doing?
And we're assuming the audience here, we're probably making some assumptions from the audience, but that many of you work with older adults in a variety of ways. So we're trying to make sure that kind of all ideas are welcome here. So if you've got some ideas and you'd like to put them into the chat, that you think might be helpful for other people, we would more than enjoy seeing them and kind of raising them up, amplifying a little bit. So the questions that Christy came up with is, how is your agency or group supporting those who are grieving, particularly those maybe that are being isolated because of the exacerbation of not being able to get together. And then if you have particular areas that you think you could do more in, what are they? What we'd like to hear from you if you think there are things that we should be doing more of, or you yourself have been living through this, the things that you would like to see more of from family members and community members. And then finally, with the challenges kind of presented by the pandemic, I think we've talked a lot about those, is that we can't even get together to mourn the losses or to celebrate the lives. And sometimes that presents some particular challenges right now. And hopefully that'll ease a little bit as we get, kind of reintroduced to community again. But we'd like to hear those. So if there are things you'd like to enter into the chat, we'd be more than happy to bring those up as well.
Yeah. So I saw somebody said their church does a grief share program with 13 lessons. Great for tips with coping and planning ahead for milestones. That's great. I think having an ongoing thing where people can connect more than once is really useful. Often I think it takes a lot of courage for people to come the first time. And so if you can say, it's okay, you don't have to talk the first time, or you can kind of just be here until you're ready. I think having longer span of meeting times is really helpful often.
Okay, as we're kind of waiting for some of those to come up, you want to talk a little bit about some of the physical, emotional, and
yeah, absolutely.
Reactions to grief?
I just think it's helpful. One of the things that is so useful in counseling people who are grieving, and just also in groups, is just for people to feel normalized, because sometimes people think, oh my gosh, this is going crazy. I'm going crazy. What's going on here? So just kind of knowing what is common is helpful. So change in appetite, sleep disturbances, deep sighing, feeling like it's difficult to breathe, less resistance to illness. A lot of people have stomach issues. Probably, and just also kind of noticing in yourself when you're grieving, when you're feeling like, gosh, this has been hard. This is hard because of changes in job, family, everything. Just noticing that these things can happen and be normal as well. Sensitivity to noise, headaches, weakness, tight muscles, fatigue, trembling. I also want to just make sure that, we can normalize these things, but also making sure that we know that if people are having a lot of symptoms, it's a good idea to send them to a doctor. It's normal to have stomach tightness. It's normal to have a change, feel like not eating, but often I just encourage people to see a doctor within the first couple of months after a loss anyway. I think about a woman who came to see me in my office. We're on the second floor. She came up through the elevator and she got here and she just was like, looked like she was going to collapse. And she's like, I know it's normal that it's kind of harder to breathe when you're grieving. And it's like, I don't think what is happening for you is normal. And I think you need to go to a doctor probably right away. And she did have some significant heart problems. And so I just want to be sure that we don't over normalize medical symptoms. But just say, yeah, that is normal, but having a hard time getting up the stair, up the elevator to here is, we need you to get to the doctor. So just like being aware of both things is important. Reactions to grief emotionally, numbness, anger, bitterness, feeling lost. Sometimes people even kind of cognitively are like, I'm kind of lost. I guess we'll get to that on another slide. Anxiety has been the number one common thing going on this year, I think, because of not only grief, but what's coming, what's happening. Everything seems out of order. Relief. People sometimes don't want to talk about, or they feel bad or uncomfortable that they might feel some relief that a person is gone, or that something significant has changed in their life. Normalizing that, it's okay to feel some relief that this person isn't in pain anymore. They're not suffering. Your life can shift from being 100% caregiving to some other things. Sometimes it's really important for people to be validated in that. And often people say, I feel really guilty saying that I feel some relief here, but it's useful to just tell people that's really normal to feel relieved about this, to feel like, yes, I'm glad they're not in pain and suffering anymore, or I'm glad that I'm glad this thing was canceled. Even sometimes we have grief about life events and just be like, okay, maybe I needed this in a different way than I realized.
I think that's really important. I remember my mom, after caring for my dad for so long, when he died, said that the thing that bothered her most about people who were trying to be helpful, again, I think you got some slides on that too, things not to say, was that she did feel a lot of relief because it wasn't 24/7 anymore. And yes, there was a spot in her life that was empty, and it was very important to recognize that, but she also felt the relief from not having to worry about, cutting up his food, so that he didn't have his reactions, the problems he had in swallowing and the things like that. And so there was a lot of, and she just said, why does everybody think I should be, absolutely devastated with his life? I cared for him intimately for 26 years. And she struggled a lot with that. And I tried to help her normalize it and say, Mom, they're just trying to be helpful. And they don't understand what you've been through. And we're also proud of you for the fact that you were so faithful to him. The fidelity there was incredible. It was an example to all of your grandchildren. So I kind of tried to help her refocus on the fact that her commitment to him is really what they were trying to recognize, and that kind of reframe or turn it back to this is really more about a way for them to express their support for you. So I think those are important.
And sometimes talking with people about, when it's been a long illness journey, just talking about anticipatory grief of you've been grieving this for a long time. You've had to grieve each loss as it goes, because sometimes also people feel guilt, like, why don't I feel sadder right now? I just lost somebody that, I've cared for all of these years. I should feel sadder. But talking with people about you've had to grieve this piece by piece for the last number of years. And that can change the way that people experience grief after a loss, after a death, because they've worked through a lot. They've grieved the loss of driving. They've grieved the loss of, in cases where people have memory issues or Alzheimer's, they've had to grieve the loss piece by piece of that person. And so when they get to the time of death, it can really be very different than somebody that didn't have a caregiving path to follow. And so just relieving people of any kind of guilt that they may feel because they don't feel the same way that others do in grieving
And I think the exact opposite is also true, especially over the last 15 months, where it just came out of the blue. You know, I
Right.
mean, this person was fine 2 weeks ago, and now they're gone. They're just gone.
Mhm.
And it's like, okay, I was expecting maybe a diagnosis and, at least 2 or 3 months to get prepared for this. And we had a lot of our clients currently that had made it very clear they were in long-term care settings and they did not want to go to the hospital. And if they got COVID, they wanted to be able to stay in the nursing facility, so at least they didn't have to die on a ventilator. So a lot of that fear and all that kind of stuff happened, and the families were just so isolated. So kind of the bitterness and the anger that we're all facing sometimes are the exact opposite in terms of the suddenness of all this,
Right.
as opposed to the long term. So the same reactions can happen as a result of the fact that it's sudden or long term. So I think that's a good point to remember as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just talking about cognitive function, inability to focus, difficulty making decisions, difficulty processing information, disorganization, all of those things are so normal and common. And I find, like, kind of societally, I think a lot of people are experiencing decrease in cognitive function right now because there's so much stress going on. And there's so much grief and so much loss that we've all kind of been like, what's going on? My brain feels like mush. But for people, especially older adults, I think it's really important for us to normalize that, because there's this fear of, am I losing it? Is this like the beginning of my cognitive decline? What's going on? People who've been very sharp all their lives, a spouse dies and they're like, I just can't even remember. I can't find my checkbook. I can't find my keys. I can't remember what I was doing today. I've never missed an appointment and I'm missing appointments. So just, that's a really normal thing. And just reassuring people, you are not losing it. You're not losing your mind. And again, if you do notice, it does happen that sometimes people do have cognitive deficits that are medical or disease related, and they can correspond with grief. But just being aware that typically it's just it's the brain's kind of being overwhelmed with grief, and that the cognitive function is not, it's not something for people to worry about. It's just something for us to normalize and say, yes, that's kind of normal, and I will try and remind you about our appointments. Also, yeah, the overwhelming problem of settling in a state is a huge thing. People are often feel really overwhelmed by that, and that's normal, and kind of offering people encouragement where you can, and just saying, yes, this is a giant, difficult problem that you're facing, and just take it piece by piece. It doesn't all have to be done right away. That's something just to encourage people to go slow through that process. And then
I'm going to keep going until
okay, sure.
Kathy, Camille, I'm not seeing any of the comments. So if there's any questions that need to be raised or any comments that need to be brought to our attention, please feel free to do that, because we're going to keep going.
Yeah, and maybe at the end of your time, because we have about 15 minutes left, but a couple of people have asked specifically about the skill builder, that Stan Hamilton. So if you have time at some point in the next 15 minutes to maybe talk about that.
I can just say, with skill builders, I don't know what's happening with that right now. I know that has been an excellent resource. They've met in Johnson County and at the Senior Center in Independence, and also in somewhere up north. And that's an excellent resource. I'm not sure what's going on with that. Maybe somebody else in this group would know more. We send people there often and speak there too. So okay, Johnson County Skill Builders has not been meeting this year. So then just the spiritual reactions in grief. Common reactions are anger, that prayers weren't answered, sense of abandonment, loss of meaning, searching for purpose, questioning faith. And again, normalizing, and also not giving answers, just listening. I think maybe the worst thing would be like saying those kind of pat answers that people sometimes would say of, well, God needed an angel, or it's all God's will. And, you know, just listening to people through those difficult spiritual things, I think is another just gift that we can give them, and allowing people to wrestle with that.
Yeah, I think some of these behavior ones we probably talked enough about. We probably don't need to go.
Right.
But again,
Right.
these kind of recognizing that there's behavior changes and then the social ones as well. I wanted to go ahead and if you finish social, I'd like to get to some of those kind of helpful and non-helpful statements. Maybe I think they're farther beyond in the slide deck, but maybe we could bring those up.
Right.
So,
right.
and some of the social stuff is we've not been able to do it because of the COVID limitations, but just recognizing that these are things that may be helpful and needed necessarily.
And Christy, as you're moving to the slide for helpful things not to say, someone had a question about how do you, for people that are grieving, how do you re-engage them? Suggestions on engaging folks.
Yeah, that I will say that has been the most difficult thing this year because of the very limited opportunities to re-engage. But talking with people about what, if you kind of recognize what people have lost, you obviously can't replace their spouse or their mother, or you can't replace, but just kind of looking at what can you do. If it's like, gosh, my husband and I had coffee every morning and I miss that so much, saying, okay, let's talk about it. Is there a small group you can meet with, invite them for coffee once a week, just to replace that social thing. Or we used to play cards with people. Can we find, kind of just looking at how do we replace, and I don't mean replace like it fits in the slot, but just say, we're gonna find some ways for you to look at what's most important, and how do you start to have that meaning in your life again? How do you re-engage socially? For some people, it's just like choosing to say, okay, is there one or two people you can call when you need a friend? Who can you call? Kind of having a short list, encouraging them to kind of keep that on hand, looking for opportunities. I talk with people about just kind of knowing when you need to push yourself a little bit, and recognizing that there is that need because you want to continue to live a meaningful and good life, and not kind of hole up and not continue to engage socially. So encouraging people to push a little bit, not too much, but in that way.
I think also calling and asking for permission, to say, not just say, call me when you need me, because they're not going to call. I mean, I think that's one of the items we'll probably talk about here in a minute, is that, and just let me know if you need anything. That's not going to happen. So I know my mom, when she went through it a little bit, there was people who said, can I call you on Tuesdays? Is Tuesday a good day for me? And not that you'd spend a lot of time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, but just checking to re-engage, to make sure that everything was okay, and getting permission from that person. And mom was pretty private. Mom was a private person and had been, because of dad for so many years, but that was important for her for people to get permission from her. And then she would tell them, no, I do my prayers at 10 o'clock in the morning, so don't call me at 10. If you want to call, you can call at 11, because I get ready for lunch. And, she had these routines. And I think recognizing those kind of sacred moments that they have is important, but then also to be able to say, but, would you do it for me? Could I call you for 5 minutes? But the one thing she didn't like was somebody who would get on and, tell about everything that was going on in their lives for 25 minutes. And that was kind of hard for her, because she wasn't a kind of person who was going to re-engage in that way. So I think getting permission and then checking with that person on a regular basis to say, is it okay if I bring by, some, treats or something on Tuesday or something like that, and then kind of check on them. So there was these items too that you had in the practical helps that I think might be, and I think we covered a good many.
I think we've kind of covered most of these things. One thing we talked about, and this might be really useful as senior centers and places that engage with older people. It's been so tricky having comfort kits that you might take out to people, or just kind of kits of remembrance, that just saying, hey, we're thinking about you. We know this is we know how hard this is, and not just like right at the beginning, but you know, sending over a box of tea, some lotion, a scented candle or a chocolate, or just something that kind of engages people's senses right at that moment, to just say you're loved and cared for, and we want you to have good in your life, and so we're thinking of you. That might be kind of a way during this COVID season where it's so hard to get together, hard to invite people, hard to say, come to our group, to say, we're going to drop by a little gift at your house, or just so that we know that you're thought of. Those kits can be useful.
Yeah, I imagine there's a lot of people on the in the audience that probably could identify a whole nother set of these avoid saying things, but some of these are classic. I mean, and people are well-meaning when they say them, but they often sit wrong and are not well received.
Right.
Especially the thing about the angel, or God needed him more than you did.
Right.
And so, you know,
Yeah, you all can kind of read through these of, you know, I know how you feel. That's because we don't know how but somebody's feeling. It's better to say, I can imagine how hard this is, or I can only imagine, rather than I do know, or God has a plan, or at least she's out of pain, or let me know if there's anything I can do. Or yeah, at least, you know, kind of even saying, well, at least they made it to this ripe old age, because it's the relationship that people grieve, not the fact that, not the age, or the young age. Well, let's see, I think there's one on here that you're young, you can have another one, you know, talking about babies or kids, just anything that is trite, or that tries to like tie a bow on it, says, well, we can kind of button this up and say, well, that's all right then. I think we just need to let people have their pain. And so maybe let's head over the soothing things or useful things to say.
Yeah, I had a hard lesson when I was very young. We were a young married couple, and we lived in a duplex next to an older woman, bachelor, who she didn't have any children, and she'd never been married. She taught school for years, and she had a white Samoyed dog, and she lost her dog, and he'd been with her for, I don't know, 20, probably 17 years, something like that. And I stupidly said something to her one time about getting another dog, like within, I don't know, a week or two of the death. And oh my God, she just looked at me like, how could you be so cruel? How could you possibly be so cruel? And I didn't, you know, I did it because I was trying to think of something nice to say to her. And it was just so cruel. I mean, when I thought about it, because this was a relationship. She mourned that relationship, just like you said. And I was just kind of saying, well, get over it. Here's something, put something else in its place. And it was just so cold on my part. And it was, you know, it was probably 26, 27 years old. And I thought, okay, I learned my lesson. I'm never doing that again. So
but I think that's also, John, we can look back and say, oh, I kind of said stupid things, or I said things I regret. I'm not calling that stupid, but regretting. And so many people, when they have after loss, they say, gosh, I wish I'd known, I wish I'd been more sensitive, I wish I'd been more caring. I hear that often from people, is I wish I hadn't said the thing I did, or when other people were going through this, or had been more supportive. And I think we have the advantage of having this time together to think about this and think, how do we want to be when somebody has a loss? How can we be supportive and not say these things? And yes, I think probably everybody here has an example of, you know, something that was said to them when they were in pain or grieving that was completely not helpful. We hold on to those. But I was telling John this, that we, in our support groups, one of the things that we do that I think is kind of a fun activity, because people start to laugh at it as a group, is say, let's write down all the dumb things you've heard. Like, that's where that list came from, is like things that were not supportive and helpful. And people are able to laugh at that. And so even as people, you know, as you're talking with people, you can say, you can ask them, what are some things that are not helpful that people have said, and then like that kind of gives them permission to let that roll off instead of holding on to, because when they say it, they're like, yeah, that was kind of a ridiculous thing for that person to say, and I'm forgive and move on, or not hold on to it as a thing that is that informs me. supportive things. Tell me more about your mom. Your dad was a wonderful man. I'll just sit here with you and we can talk if you want. We were just talking about him last night, sharing a funny story, sharing a memory, even if it's not a funny story, just saying, I remember how he came in so dedicated. He was so dedicated and he would always sit in this chair and say good morning to me, and that made my morning. So just when we share memories, when we share meaningful memories and moments, that is such a gift to others. Let's see.
We're getting
I'm
close
giving
to our
just a
time here.
about a
yeah.
5-minute heads up.
Okay.
So are there any other comments, Kathy, that you've seen in the chat box that we need to recognize?
There was one that was way up there. I don't think I can find it again, but it had something to do with because, well, just families, senior centers, everyone may not have been able to recognize a death or a funeral or through a dinner or a celebration. It would be important to go back, even if it's months later,
Absolutely.
to recreate
Absolutely.
those.
Yes.
We never, ever get tired of ritual. And rituals can be celebrated at the moment, at the experience of the, the rite of a funeral, but they can a memorial. I think it is so important for us to commemorate, whether it's, and maybe it's just we didn't get to say goodbye to her in a proper way. So here's what we're doing. I just had a friend lose a son, and it's been 6 weeks before they'll be able to get together. And they just deliberately set that time forward. So I think it is absolutely essential for us to spend a good amount of time over the course of the next 2 years as we gather again to be able to commemorate those events. And Christy, I'll let you kind of weigh in on that, but I think it's absolutely essential.
Yeah, I agree. And I think making those opportunities communally, it doesn't have to be one family saying we're going to get together, but just like at your senior center to say, would you bring a picture in that we could put up, because we want to remember in the month of May the people that we lost during the time that we were closed, or we're going to plant a tree in honor of the people that we love and miss, and would you come, and this will just be a tree that we can all remember. Just something practical and that is kind of a low barrier to entry, that people don't have to do a big plan, but just show up and share and remember together.
Okay, we are right at the hour. Anything else, Kathy or Carmela, that we need to finish up with here?
Well, I'm seeing many thank you, excellent presentation. So I will just agree with that and say thank you, because this really was an excellent presentation. And as I'm sitting here, it's not just our professional lives, but personally, grief and loss is a part of life. Right. So this was helpful on the professional level, but also for each of us on a personal level as well. So thank you so much.
Yeah. And I'll just say on that note, because I know I'm feeling this sometimes when I talk about grief, like my own stories come into my brain. And so that may have been happening to everybody. So I just encourage you to just give yourself some love and maybe go outside and just take a breath, because this is grief is heavy and it affects each of us personally. So if you can, just kind of take some deep breaths after this and enjoy some sunshine, which we've got today.
Yeah, this time has really kind of helped us, I think, all think more about the importance of family and friends. And I just know the first time I got to hug one of my grandkids, I hadn't been able to for a year. It was like, I didn't even know. It just felt so different and so good. And for them too, they, it's like, Vampa, I haven't seen you forever. And I said, I know. And we've seen each other on Facebook, but obviously it's different. So thank you so much. And Christy, great job. I've really enjoyed working with you on this. I'm so proud of your work, John. And you keep up the good work too. And Kathy, thank you. And Carmela, this has been fun. Appreciate it.
Right. Thanks so much. So just say that for those of you that are leaving us now, we hope to see you in person for H Positive 2022. Look for a save the date sometime late this year. For the rest of you, we hope that you'll stick around for our final door prizes that have been donated by sponsors and partners. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Enjoy your day.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.